welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. It was a bright, festive Friday at Marissa's office. The large conference room was decked with balloons and streamers, a stark contrast to the typical corporate gray. As her husband, I'd helped organize this surprise for her 40th birthday, believing it would bridge the distance that had crept between us over the past months. The office buzzed with energy as coworkers shuffled in, bearing gifts and wide smiles. I stood beside Marissa, trying to partake in the joy, but her distracted glances toward her phone poked at my brewing suspicions. "Everyone, thank you for joining," I announced, leading the applause as Marissa cut the cake. She flashed a practiced smile, her eyes scanning the room. It was then that Jeff, a name I'd heard in passing but never met, stepped forward with a sleek gift bag. "Happy birthday, Marissa." Jeff handed her the bag with a wink. The room filled with curious whispers and knowing chuckles as she reached inside, pulling out a beautifully wrapped box. The moment she lifted the lid, a silver bracelet shimmered under the fluorescent lights, drawing a collective "ah" from around the room. But as Marissa lifted it, a small card fell from beneath, floating to the ground. My heart sank as I picked it up, unfolding the note that read, "Thanks for a wonderful weekend." Laughter erupted among some co-workers, while others exchanged awkward glances. My hands trembled, the note confirming my worst fears. She hadn't been at her sister's as she'd told me, she'd been with him. "Jeff, this is too much," Marissa stuttered, her facade cracking under the weight of the room's attention. "I insist," Jeff said, his voice carrying a hint of private triumph. The celebration continued around me, but I felt as if I were encased in ice. The cheerful noise blurred into a cacophony of betrayal. The rest of the afternoon was a painful blur, with every laugh and whisper amplifying my humiliation. As the party dwindled, I confronted Marissa in her office. "How could you?" I asked, the note crumpled in my clenched fist. "Mark, I can explain," she began, her face pale. I read the note. Was it all a lie, then? Our marriage? The questions poured out, fueled by a cocktail of anger and devastation. "It wasn't like that. It just happened," she pleaded, her usual composure shattered. "Save it." "I've seen enough," I cut her off, my voice cold, resolute. I left the office that day with a heart heavier than when I had entered. My trust was shattered, scattered like the pieces of our relationship that now seemed beyond repair. The drive home was a blur, each mile a stretch of torment. As the city lights flickered past, a plan began to take shape in my mind. She had made her choice, and now I would make mine. The sweetness of revenge started to replace the bitterness of betrayal, a fitting gift for her betrayal. I wouldn't confront her yet. No, I needed something undeniable, something that would leave no room for excuses. My next steps were clear: gather evidence, consult a lawyer, and prepare for the fallout. The birthday surprise had turned into a nightmare, but I was awake now, and I was ready to act. The following days were a calculated blur. I moved with a singular focus, driven by the cold clarity that betrayal instills. My first stop was a reputable private investigator's office, nestled in an unassuming building downtown. The nondescript exterior belied the life-altering discussions that took place within its walls. "I need concrete evidence," I explained to the investigator, a seasoned woman named Helen, with a no-nonsense demeanor. "Photos, texts, anything you can get." My voice was steady, the product of nights spent rehearsing this conversation. Helen nodded, scribbling notes. "We can start surveillance tomorrow. Do you have any specific times or locations in mind?" "Her office, this Jeff's place." "Track her phone if you can." "She's sloppy, won't see it coming," I said, handing over a list of addresses and times I'd compiled from her stories that hadn't added up. "Consider it done. You'll have updates by the end of the week," Helen assured me with a grim sort of professionalism. The kind that came from seeing too many marriages crumble in her line of work. Leaving the office, I felt a twinge of satisfaction. It was the first step in reclaiming my life, in scripting the ending of this sordid chapter. The next few days were a masterclass in pretense. I maintained a facade of normalcy around Marissa, engaging in mundane conversations about work and the news, all while my phone buzzed silently with updates from Helen. By Thursday, I had enough evidence to bury any doubts. Photos of Marissa entering Jeff's apartment, timestamps that contradicted her alibis, and more heartbreakingly, a video of them together, laughing in a way she hadn't with me in years. That evening, as I sat across from her at dinner, the weight of the evidence burned a hole in my pocket. "How was work?" I asked, voice casual, as I passed her the salt. "It was fine. Busy as always," she replied, avoiding my gaze. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she silenced it quickly, a flicker of anxiety crossing her features. "You seem distracted lately. Anything you want to talk about?" I prodded, watching her carefully. "Just tired, that's all," she murmured, pushing her food around her plate. I nodded, the act of forgiveness far from my thoughts. "I understand. Maybe a weekend away would help. Just the two of us." Her eyes flicked up, hopeful, then guarded. "Maybe," she conceded, a note of relief in her voice, thinking perhaps this could be a turning point. But the weekend would never come for us. Late that night, I made my move. While she slept, I packed a bag with my essentials and left behind the hollow shell of our marriage in that house. There was no dramatic goodbye, no confrontation with the evidence. That would come later, under the watchful eyes of lawyers. I drove to a friend's house, the city lights streaking by in a blur of liberation and loss. Once there, I sent her a message: "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Public place." The next morning, at a quiet cafe, the confrontation unfolded. I slid the envelope across the table to her. "You forgot something at Jeff's," I said, my voice even, my heart pounding in my chest. She opened the envelope, her face draining of color as she sifted through the photos and messages. "Mark, I..." "Save it," I interrupted, the finality in my voice echoing around the sparse cafe. "My lawyer will contact you. I suggest you find one too." With that, I stood and left, the chapter of us closed with a silent, resounding snap. As I stepped outside, the cool air felt like the first clean breath in months. The storm had broken, and I was finally free to rebuild from the wreckage. The next few weeks transformed into a series of strategic moves, more akin to a chess match than the remnants of a marriage. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Gregory, had laid out the steps of our approach in his stark, windowless office. "As painful as it is, the evidence you've gathered is solid," Gregory stated, arranging the photographs and text message printouts like a damning mosaic on his desk. "This will significantly influence the proceedings, especially in terms of asset division." Sitting across from him, I nodded, the businesslike tone a balm to the chaos of my emotions. "What are the next steps?" I asked, eager to push this through to its final act. "We file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity. I'll draft the paperwork. You need to be prepared for a counter-response. She won't take this lying down, especially if she thinks you're going for more than a clean break," he explained, his pen poised over a legal pad. True to Gregory's prediction, Marissa's reaction was swift and harsh. Her lawyer, a formidable woman with a reputation for turning even the most clear-cut cases into drawn-out battles, reached out within days. The message was clear: Marissa was not going to settle quietly. I received a call from her lawyer. "They're threatening to drag this out unless you agree to a more favorable settlement for Marissa," Gregory informed me during one of our daily updates. "That's extortion," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "She cheats, and I have to pay for it. It's a common tactic." But don't worry, we'll counter it. Just stick to the plan, he reassured me, his voice a steady anchor. The following day, we met at the courthouse, a looming building of stone and heavy doors that seemed to echo with the weight of judgments past. As Marissa and I faced each other in the stark hallway, surrounded by the murmur of legal battles and the sharp scent of polished wood, the air between us crackled with the tension of impending confrontation. "Mark, can we talk?" Marissa approached, her voice softer, eyes not quite meeting mine. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, my stance firm, though her appearance, so diminished from the vibrant woman I'd married, tugged at something I'd thought was long extinguished. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings were clinical. Marissa's lawyer painted her as a remorseful spouse, momentarily led astray in a moment of weakness. My side laid bare the calculated betrayal, supported by Helen's meticulous documentation. The judge, a seasoned woman with an unreadable expression, listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes, her pen scratching a quiet counterpoint to the lawyer's arguments. "Given the evidence presented, I am inclined to expedite this matter," the judge finally declared after what felt like hours. "We will reconvene next week for the final statements. In the meantime, I urge both parties to consider the long-term repercussions of this ordeal." As we filed out of the courtroom, Marissa's gaze finally met mine, a mixture of regret and defiance. But the time for words had passed, swept away in the legal formalities and the cold, hard path to retribution. On the drive home, my phone rang incessantly, reporters having caught wind of the drama. Ignoring the calls, I focused on the road ahead, each mile a step away from the past, each thought centered on the future I would rebuild from the ashes of what had once been a shared dream. The final court date loomed like a specter over what remained of my fractured life. The once warm memories of my marriage to Marissa now lay as cold and lifeless as the legal documents that catalogued its demise. As I sat in the half-light of dawn, the silence of my apartment was a stark contrast to the turmoil within me, plans forming like shadows in the fog. The courtroom was charged with a palpable tension as Marissa and I entered from opposite sides. Her face was a mask of composed distress, a look so perfected it almost made me doubt the duplicity I'd witnessed firsthand. But the simmering anger within me, fueled by betrayal, wasn't swayed by her performance. As the proceedings began, both lawyers presented their closing arguments with a clinical precision that belied the emotional chaos the divorce had wrought. Marissa's lawyer made a final plea for reconciliation and forgiveness, playing to the court's sympathy. "Marriage is sacred, and every effort should be made to salvage it," her lawyer concluded, casting a pointed look in my direction. When it was my turn, I stood, my legs firm despite the quaking of my inner world. I cleared my throat, the courtroom falling silent, all eyes pinned on me. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "this isn't just about infidelity or broken vows. It's about deceit at its most fundamental level." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Pulling out a series of photographs, I handed them to the bailiff who passed them to the judge. "These aren't just evidence of an affair. They show a premeditated betrayal that goes beyond marital vows. This," I pointed to a picture of Marissa and Jeff at a real estate showing, "is a property bought in secret, funded by our joint savings, meant as their future home." Gasps filled the room, and Marissa's face paled, her facade cracking. The judge's eyes flicked back and forth between the photographs and the stunned faces of my wife and her lawyer. "In light of this new evidence, I'm requesting the harshest penalties under the law for financial deceit and emotional damages," I concluded, my voice echoing slightly in the suddenly tense room. The judge nodded, her expression somber. "I will take this into consideration in my final ruling." Court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Marissa approached, tears streaming down her face. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I was going to tell you." "Save it," I cut her off, my heart hardening against her pleas. "You made your choice long ago." With that, I turned and walked away, the sound of her sobbing a bitter symphony that played out the end of our marriage. Weeks later, the divorce was finalized with terms heavily in my favor. The property was signed over to me, and significant financial recompense was ordered. But the victory was Pyrrhic, the taste of retribution ash in my mouth. As I stood outside the courthouse, a free man in every legal sense, I felt the first stirrings of peace. The plan had been executed flawlessly, Marissa and Jeff's betrayal not just exposed but punished in equal measure. Yet, as I walked through the bustling city, my solitude was a cloak I wrapped around myself, warding off the shadows of what I had lost. In the end, justice had been served, cold and hard as the winter sky above. But as I passed a familiar cafe, a figure caught my eye, a woman sitting alone, her features strikingly similar to Marissa's yet distinctly different. Our eyes met, and in her gaze, I saw a flicker of something new, perhaps a hint of new beginnings or merely the recognition of shared pain. In that moment, I made a choice. I walked into the cafe, towards the possibility of something beyond vengeance. Because while the past could never be undone, the future still held pages yet to be written.